shall not be moved. We shall not be moved like a tree that's planted by the water. We shall not be moved. We shall not be moved.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome.
Good afternoon.
Okay, let's go ahead and get started. I think we have everyone available now. We're all, I think many of us trying this out for the first time, so I appreciate everyone's patience, and we've got a full house. I'm happy to see. So good afternoon, my name is Damon Seils, and I am a member of the Town Council in Carrboro, North Carolina. And I have the privilege of welcoming you all here today for this special event that we've titled Hearing Impacted Voices. It's a moderated panel discussion on inequality, policing, and injustice. This event is sponsored by the Orange County Local Reentry Council in partnership with the Towns of Carrboro, Chapel Hill, and Hillsborough. I want to be sure to acknowledge the director of Orange County's Criminal Justice Resource Department, Kate Fenhagen, who is also in attendance here today, for pulling this event together, as well as staff members of Orange County and the 3 towns who helped with preparations and promotion. So I'm happy to say that we had more than 200 people register for the event today, and we're broadcasting right here in the Zoom webinar, as well as streaming live to an overflow crowd on YouTube. So thank you to all of you for joining us. So before I hand the mic over to our moderator, I want to briefly address a couple of orientation items for everyone. The primary goal of today's panel discussion is for us to learn from our guests about their work at the intersections of race, poverty, and the criminal legal system in North Carolina. There may be time at the end of the discussion, questions from attendees. And if you do think of a question for our panelists, you can type it into the Q&A box, which you can access by selecting the Q&A icon in your Zoom app. Please know that if you're watching through the live stream on YouTube, you will not be able to access the Q&A function. We are recording the event, and we'll share a link to the recording with all the registered attendees and on social media as soon as it's available after the event. Finally, if you want to learn more about the Orange County Local Reentry Council or the county's Criminal Justice Resource Department, please visit the department's website at orangecountync.gov/CJRD. And I'll share that link with everyone in the chat box in a few moments. So to get us started, the moderator for today's discussion is James Williams. James served as the public defender for Orange and Chatham counties from 1990 until his retirement in 2017. He's the first vice president of the Chapel Hill Carrboro branch of the NAACP, and he is chair of the North Carolina Commission on Racial and Ethnic Disparities in the Criminal Justice System. So with that, James, I'm going to hand it over to you. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Damon, and good afternoon to our attendees. I will, and it's my honor to moderate this panel. What drew us together this afternoon was to provide an opportunity to allow individuals who have been impacted by our criminal justice system and are still being impacted, the opportunity to speak about what is unfolding today, because quite often we hear from stakeholders and we hear from so-called leaders, and we make policy and decisions about our system of justice or injustice without adequately hearing the voices of those most directly impacted. And so at this moment in time, when the country and indeed to some extent the world is reeling from the killings, the brutal, traumatic killings of Black people, one after the other. Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, George Floyd. In the midst of a pandemic where Black lives are being disproportionately impacted. And we have a person in the White House who's shown callous disregard for those lives. And on top of that, here in the state of North Carolina, as it relates to people who are incarcerated in our prisons, the governor of this state and the secretary of the Department of Public Safety showed significant disregard to the safety and well-being of those entrusted in their care because they are incarcerated. And so all of these things have led to an uprising within the state of North Carolina, within this country, and indeed around the world. And some are saying, this is a pivot point. This is an inflection point. This feels different. We're going to explore that today with our panelists, and we're going to get their thoughts on those issues, whether it's policing, whether it's our court system, whether it's our healthcare system. And we're going to learn from them. And so without further ado, I'll briefly introduce our panelists, and I'll start with Will Elmore, who is a North Carolina certified peer support specialist and mediator. He's the outreach coordinator for the Reintegration Support Network in Carrboro, along with Tommy Green, one of our other panelists. He is the founder of Wounded Healers, which provides peer support for individuals reentering and at-risk youth. Will spent a number of years in prison and was released from Orange Correctional in, I believe, 2015. Since that time, he has been a leader in the local Reentry Council and has spoken widely about his journey toward reentry. So we're looking forward to hearing from him. Tommy Green is the Orange County Community Health Worker at the formerly Incarcerated Transition Program, or FIT, in the Orange County Health Department. He provides case management to individuals reentering with chronic health issues. Tommy is also a North Carolina certified peer support specialist and a founder of Wounded Healers. He too is a leader and early supporter of the local Reentry Council. He also has previously served years in prison. And finally, we will hear from Whitley Carpenter, who is a staff attorney at For Justice. And that's a short title, but Whitley is so much more than that. She, to me, is not only just an attorney, she is an organizer, she is a mobilizer, She has a passion for working with and addressing issues affecting people who have been incarcerated and people who are re-entering society. And we're very pleased to have her to join us for this discussion. And, you know, what I'm here mainly to do is to sort of facilitate the conversation. So hopefully we will proceed. This is going to be a raw discussion. We have not practiced or rehearsed this. So it's coming from the heart. And Tommy, I think if I might, I'll begin with you. You know, in terms of the pandemic and COVID-19, as someone who has spent time in prison, how did, following what was happening within the North Carolina prison system in particular, and the apparent lack of concern for addressing the issues and needs of people incarcerated, how did that impact you emotionally? How did you experience that?
First and foremost, I want to go ahead and thank you for having me and my partner on to this panel discussion. To answer your question, to be honest with you, it's kind of a tough question to answer, because honestly, I'm still kind of like processing everything that's going on, because not only did we get hit with COVID, you know, got hit with the George Floyd thing, which is definitely nothing new, but you know, it seems like a lot of things just happen at one time. So before I have a chance to really wrap my head around one thing, here goes another crisis or another emergency. But as far as, you know, my thoughts and feelings on the impact that it has on the prison population, I can definitely empathize with them, because I understand that anytime something like this happens, all the yards close down. So you're already taking a very highly confined situation and area and kind of like doubling that. So with that being said, everything that's connected to being incarcerated anyway, as far as emotional and, you know, mental strains that brings, you gotta intensify that by 10 or by 20 now, because it's even more of a confined space. And being in that situation, you're reminded even more how vulnerable you are, because again, it's a pandemic going around right now that are killing people, taking people out. And if you know anything about a pandemic or viruses or anything like this, confined areas are the most vulnerable areas. So with that being said, you got the most vulnerable population in the mix of something this serious. And then on top of that, already the prison system is already kind of iffy as far as how they deal with it, guys that's inside or whatever. So I can only imagine what's going on behind that wall and how it affects me. Again, I just really empathize with those guys, and I put myself in that situation, because I'm a person that was incarcerated for 11 years, 8 months, over a decade. So, you know, I know the feeling of being trapped in there. And then of course, it was never no pandemic or anything like that going on when I was incarcerated, but there were things that would happen on the yard, like maybe a big fight or something like that would shut the yard down. And so I actually know how they feel right now to be confined to your room indefinitely, you know, 24 hours a day or 23 hours and only 1 hour out at a time, you know. So again, man, it's a rough situation. And I really don't think that the response to it from North Carolina is the greatest right now, because they are letting guys out that are what they consider high risk, but I don't think they're doing it at a fast enough rate. And I'm pretty sure it's a lot more people inside that fit that criteria that are stuck right now that are not getting out.
So can you, while you have the mic, so to speak, can you share with us some of the work that you are doing with the FIT program and why that is important and significant?
Yeah, definitely. So again, the Formerly Incarcerated Transition Program is a program that connects recently released individuals from incarceration that have a chronic condition to free healthcare. So one of the reasons the Formerly Incarcerated Transition Program was even started, because our director, Dr. Evan Ashkin, he noticed a extreme disconnect between guys coming home with these chronic conditions and being in continuity of care with their chronic conditions, you know, having access to meds, so on and so forth. So this was already an issue before the pandemic happened. So after the pandemic happened, now you have a sort of an influx of people that are coming out with these same conditions. But keep in mind, even before the pandemic even happened, there was a supreme disconnect with continuity of care. So it was already kind of a problem or issue before the pandemic happened. So now that the pandemic happened, lo and behold, our director, he came up with, and this is all the testament to the work that our director does and the type of guy that he is. He came up with another branch of FIT called FIT Connect. And what FIT Connect does is we strictly deal with everyone that's being released during COVID. And we help them get connected to healthcare and kind of take care of some small things that they might need, like a phone perhaps, because again, with the pandemic going on, a lot of clinics and hospitals are doing telehealth. And so these guys are coming out, of course, without smartphones. So that's one of the jobs that FIT Connect does. We connect them to their healthcare service and we provide that smartphone for them so they can get on their telehealth conference calls. And how that's really affected us really is just, again, everybody in the FIT, right now the FIT program is offered in 5 counties: Orange County, Durham County, Mecklenburg, Guilford County, and Wake County. So what that's looking like for us is every community health worker in the program right now is just getting it's almost like our case levels are doubling. We're getting a lot more referrals to the FIT Connect and the FIT program. But again, I think we're doing a very good job of connecting these guys, because we're starting to see a lot of people that are coming home again, and it's the same story. They're coming home with no continuity of care and nobody has secured this for them. They're just letting them go, saying, hey, you know. And then the thing about it too, they're even more restricted because technically they're still considered incarcerated until their actual release date. So you're sending these guys home and then you're restricting their movements, you're restricting where they can work, you're not offering no type of funding for them to get these meds, so on and so forth. So again, the burden of kind of taking care of these people lands on the organizations like ours.
So I want to follow up with you as it relates to some of the comments that Tommy just shared with us, as it relates to reentry, the concept of reentry. What does that mean? And what does it mean within the context of this sort of pandemic environment? What are the challenges that have to be addressed? And, is adequate resources being put toward that?
No. But in all fairness, I wonder how prepared could we have been for something like this anyway?
Right.
It's as if, from my vantage point, it wasn't anticipated well. It wasn't projected to be as widespread as it is. And if it was, if people who sit in positions of power knew what I don't know, that kind of reinforces why we're having this discussion right now about systemic racism, systemic inequality, systemic disregard for life. Well, I think everything that we're talking about is predicated on the value of lives. And too often in my short lifespan, because I'm fairly young, there's been a consistent, persistent push by people that look like me, pressing against the gate saying, hey, our lives matter too, whether it's mass incarceration, whether it's getting reacclimated to society after you paid your debt to society. These are just, tentacles or branches coming from the same tree. And it's very exhausting. It's necessary that we keep having these conversations, but personally, I think we've been talking too much about some of the same things of a different stripe from one decade to the next. And we keep getting the same replies that we're going to reform, we're going to relook, we're going to readdress, we're going to redo. And after we finally after we finally sober up from that concussion, it's something else to contend with.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, and
So,
I'm fairly young, man, and we all walking around, people that look like me walking around with a concussion, and we're expected to perform well. The last I heard about concussions, it's unfair to expect you to perform well after that. There's been damage, trauma to the brain. And we constantly expected to perform well under duress. If it's not one duress to the next. You know, I always often wonder why people like me lead the pack in things like high blood pressure and cholesterol. No doubt, it takes a lot of personal responsibility to be healthy. But the trauma and the stress we live under day by day, man, it's by God's grace we still exist. Because we have an enemy that's been after us forever, it seems. And he's relentless about it. And he sits in position of power to make real serious changes that we could be better off, and we're not getting that. And I tell my white friends who ask me how I feel about such things, I tell them, man, that it's unfortunate to say this, but this is how I really feel. Nobody starts listening to us until we, in terms that older people used to say, until we act a fool. Now everybody wants to listen to what we have to say, but as long as we're behaving like expected, as long as we're making a lot of people comfortable in these rooms, we'll be all right. You know, throw some music on, throw some barbecue on the grill. You know, we'll be all right. Come Monday, if it wasn't for Corona, I really don't think we would be having this conversation right now because everybody's kind of forced to sit still and pay a little bit more attention.
So Will, I want to thank you for sharing that. I mean, I think you hit right into the heart of the matter. And it relates to something that Tommy said, because when I was going through some of the more recent police and vigilante killings, he said, it's nothing new. And we know that. We know that. I mean, we can call some names, even just within the past decade, but it goes back hundreds of years. But in the past decade, I mean, you have people like Oscar Grant, you have Michael Brown, you have Eric Garner, you have Walter Scott, you have Tamir Rice, a mere child, who I believe I saw on Twitter, this would have been his 18th birthday, his 18th birthday. A child killed without a chance, doing something that most of people in my generation did routinely, playing with a toy gun. The callousness of law enforcement to take a life of a child, and then on top of that, to deny him the comfort of his sister who simply wanted to cradle him in her arms and let him know that he was not alone. He was even deprived of that. And to constantly have systems and officers who do these acts not be held accountable. So we have been here before. And it does raise the question, why now, all of a sudden, you have all these people, all of these officials, all of these departments saying, oh my God, racism is real. We've got to deal with this. Talk to me about that.
I enjoy trying to consider the full matter. I don't know, some people may believe it to just be a great story. However, I believe it's a divinely inspired book. And when I read about Solomon, who was all wise in his day, he constantly reiterates the point of consider the whole matter before you make a decision. So when I take my baseball cap off and I put on my khakis and my soft bottom shoes and I try to sit in the seat of white people, some I know, some I don't. And I often wonder what it's like to be white with some privilege and to have this fear, this concern toward Black people. And I could think of a whole list of things that make sense to me. But when I try to imagine putting on a uniform like a police officer who sits in this ultimate position of power, who supposedly has had this special training, and who supposedly has taken an oath to uphold the law that I don't know anything about, who knows laws that I'll never know, who gets paid to uphold these laws. And he continues to egregiously, live on film, live on camera, live on the news, murder, assault, disrespect Black men, women, and children. I'm highly concerned. I'm pissed off. Anytime somebody calls me and asks me how I feel, I say, I'm not happy, I'm pissed off. I really don't even want to talk. But it's a few people I respect greatly that ask me to do this. And every time I do it, I wonder, I ask God, is this a part of my calling? Because I'm speaking for a lot of my brothers and sisters that are in prison, worried about Corona, that are worried about getting out to this world that we live in today. So it's not just, I put my personal feelings to the side. And I guess before the Constitution was written, while it was being written and the ink was still wet, there's a disregard for human life, man. I say rewrite the Constitution. It's not indelible. It's not a divinely inspired document. And from what I understand, it says that I'm not even a human being. So let's lay that out. We've rewritten everything else. We've taken down monuments. Let's rewrite the Constitution. Let brown people, Black people, and white people sit at the table and rewrite it. I know that sounds sacrilegious, and I know that sounds, how dare you say such a thing? And you know what I do? I sit up and I look in the camera and say, how dare you blatantly disrespect people that look like me and murder them on camera, man, and get away with impunity. So what's more important, the Constitution or Black lives?
Well, one of you, both of you have interactions with people who have had encounters with the criminal justice system. And you work with people who are officials, stakeholders in that system. Is there anything that you wish to offer related to this, just talking to the folk who are actually making decisions, making policy related to these issues, that you would like to have them? Because everybody's saying, as I said before, they're saying, DAs are saying, judges are saying, police departments are saying, this is different. We've got to do things better. We've got to do things differently. So if you were to say, well, since you asked, these are some things you can do differently, what would you tell them? Tommy, would you want to speak to that?
Yeah, I could try. That's a great question. The only problem with trying to answer that question is, you're dealing with something that's been around for over 5 centuries. It's over 500 years, just to make it simple. Yeah. So with that being said, of course, it's not going to be no overnight answer, no overnight. It's just not going to happen overnight. But my thing is this, like Will said, start with the foundation and the root of the problem. These people operate with impunity because certain laws, certain bills, certain acts are in place to help them circumvent the law. And also another good point that Will made, that when these laws were written, it was written at a time that the Black men didn't have no voice. So we living in a country right now governed by laws that we had no say so. So that's definitely the first problem, the first solution to it. The second solution, in my opinion, because it's clear that the police officers getting away with murder. There's no getting around it. So I always said it's an eye for an eye mentality, but not necessarily vigilante. Okay, this cop killed this guy, let's suit up and go kill the cop. No. What I'm saying is the police should be held just as accountable as me and Will would be held accountable if we was to murder someone. If we go out and kill someone right now, it wouldn't be no, let us go home, we'll sort out if we're going to charge you later or not. We're getting arrested ASAP.
It wouldn't be no consider the whole matter?
No, not at all. it wouldn't even be a lower degree of murder. We would get charged with first degree murder out the gate. And then when we go to court, they'll figure out if we're going to try to charge second degree, third degree, or whatever, whatnot. So if the police had to face that same punitive punishment, I think we would definitely see a difference. If the cop, anytime an unarmed civilian is killed, it should be an automatic murder charge. I don't care what the circumstance is, whether the police killed him, whether a regular citizen killed him, so on and so forth. If that police pulls his gun and kills someone, and that person was found to not have a firearm on them, that officer should be charged with first degree murder out the gate. I believe that once they start facing that type of punishment, then we'll definitely see a change. But then at the same time, remember at the beginning of what I said, this has been happening for over 500 years. So even that might not even be the answer. We might be on the right path right now as far as looting, tearing stuff up. I hate to say that, and I only participated in nonviolent protests myself. I hate to say that might be what's needed, but sometimes, that's what wakes people up. Everybody gets on Black people and saying, hell, it doesn't make no sense. They're destroying their own community. Guess what? This is America, buddy. No Black business owner really could say, I'm not gonna say no Black business owner, but the majority of Black business owners still pay up and report to somebody. They gotta pay rent on their office space they have. They pay taxes on every dollar they make. They pay taxes on every employee they pay. And guess what? That money goes up to that money goes up to the higher source, and the higher source that receives those payments, those are the ones that are hurt just as much as the small business owner. So yeah, I'm sorry that some small business owners had to take a loss, but it's casualties in every war. And guess what? As you can see, like Will said, these monuments getting tore down. They starting to revisit this defunding police departments in certain areas.
Can I interrupt you, please, my friend? I mean, this thing is so overwhelming that if we really want to begin equality, justice, and equity, we will have to go so far back in reverse and disinfect the stain of oppression in this country, which runs so deep in the ground, they don't make a piece of equipment that can dig deep enough to uproot the nastiness that have been done to my people here. And for people who want to say I had nothing to do with that, I stand back up to them and say, you benefit so much from that. And if you really do care about me or anybody that looks like me, I want to see how well you use your privilege and your power and your position to advocate for people like me. Not just right now, not when something happens. Live a life that reflects that. Because people that look like me have lived a life trying to do everything to be compliant, to get along, to sit beside, to share spaces with, and nothing we did has worked. Because this doesn't just affect people who are hooligans or hoodlums or street thugs. It has been affecting people who have worked all their life, paid their bills, got a great education, that can articulate, that can wear Brooks Brothers suit, that drive Teslas, that sit in positions of power, wear badges, but because of their skin color, we're talking about a condition of the heart. And when that heart ain't circumcised to see everybody equally, we could sing all we want, we could march all we want, we could write policy all we want, but if a man's heart hasn't changed, he's gonna be who he is wherever seat he sits in. Right. And that's really the crux of what we're dealing with. That's the quiddity of what we're dealing with, the heart of men. And unfortunately, the men who sit in power, it seems like they took an oath that we maintain our power on the backs of other people. And every now and then that oath becomes public. And every now and then when we see that, we stop and pause for a minute, but it's been happening so consistently, Mr. Williams, that if it wasn't for Corona, I'm afraid that, man, come Monday morning, we could take the mask off, take the gloves off, put the disinfectant up, and we'll just keep on moving like, oh, well. And I challenge all of my white friends to show me how much you really care for me, because again, I think that Black people are doing way too much talking. It's time for us to sit back and watch white people discuss what they're gonna do different. Yeah, that's what I want to hear. That's the Zoom meeting I want to be on. I want to be privy to nothing but white people in all positions of life that start talking about how can we be different towards them. Because
Mhm.
they keep asking us to get on these channels and on these rooms and share what we think. Why are we not listening to what they think? Why I don't see a groups of nothing but white people downtown in front of police stations? That's what I want to see. And then you have my attention.
All right. Well, that's a good point. And I think there will be opportunities for that. I'm sure there are some white folk in this audience that can make that happen. And
Please
maybe
give me
they'll get on it.
the Zoom ID and all of that so I can be privy to it.
Okay. So one thing that both of you raised related to the Constitution, and of course, one of the big issues with the Constitution that those who have been involved in this whole reform effort has been pushing, but it didn't just start with us, because when it was written into the Constitution, there were those who argued against it then, abolitionists, and that is, the 13th Amendment that abolished involuntary servitude, except for those duly convicted of crime. And so that was a big loophole that has helped pave the way for what we now call mass incarceration. So that might be an aspect of, if you're going to look at, an aspect of the Constitution, that's certainly one that might be due for a revisit. Just abolish involuntary servitude, period, might be a way to go related to that. Let me switch to Whitley and give her an opportunity to weigh in on this conversation. But Whitley, one of the things I wanted to raise with you, you made a decision in terms of your career path.
Oh God, we lose our moderator.
Uh-oh.
It looks like we lost James temporarily. So Whitley, what do you want to take the floor for until he comes back?
Yeah, I had a few comments based on some of the things that were already talked about. So I'll go ahead and start with that until he gets back. Can everybody hear me? Uh-oh. Can y'all hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Whitley.
Okay,
Go ahead.
All right. Thank you too for your comments. And I wouldn't be here if there were not someone who was directly impacted here to give their voice and their story and their perspective, because I think that's a big part of how I go about my work. James mentioned I work with Forward Justice, and we're a strategy center in Durham, and our focus is really on racial, social, and economic justice. And we do that by working with organizations and coalitions that are at the forefront of the social movements in the Southern United States. But when we're thinking about all the work that we do, one of the key components to anything that we get involved in is to ask ourselves, like, does whatever this issue is provide an opportunity to change culture, to change narrative, to change values in a way that we can talk about the issue where we center people and families who are most directly impacted. And that way we're able to better socialize the inequity and the injustice around that issue to more people. And so I'm very happy to be on this panel with you too. I see James is back, so I'm gonna pass the mic.
I'm not sure what happened. I'm not a Zoom expert, so I won't. But Whitley, so the question that I was about to raise with you is, you chose a career path. I mean, you're one of these people, you could have gone into contracts, real estate, I don't know, whatever, and you chose the career path of being an advocate for those who have been impacted by our criminal justice system. What led you in that direction?
Well, James, I mean, honestly, I'm a Black woman, and my freedom is directly tied to the freedom of the rest of the people who look like me and are impacted by the system like me. And you brought up the Constitution and that clause that still allows for slavery if you are convicted of a crime. And I'm sure you guys have heard the quote that no one's free until we all are free. And I 100% believe that. If my brothers and sisters are struggling, then I am too. And so for me, I feel like if I had gone into any of those other areas you mentioned, contracts or real estate or whatever, I could not personally keep myself from being a part of this work. If we are going to abolish the system, I am an abolitionist. I have no problem saying that.
Right.
If we are going to do that, then we can't just continue with the status quo. And so I hope that my voice can maybe bring folks from different perspectives together, because there is power in numbers, and we're going to have to, as you mentioned, organize and mobilize people in order to challenge the power structures. And so I do this work because it's a personal mission. It is, I value people, I value humanity, and I love Black people. We were brought to this country and have not been treated as citizens since we have been here. And I think as a Black woman who's been given many privileges and opportunities to get to where I am, it would just be a disservice. It would be inhumane of me to not be in this fight.
So thank you for sharing that. And one of the things that we've been talking about, and you've been involved in this fight at so many different levels. And I'm going to zero in on one at the moment, and that's the pandemic and COVID-19. And you are part of a, COVID-19 collaborative, I guess is what we kind of called ourselves, but and not just a part of, I mean, you really took on a leadership role in addressing this issue. Can you share with our attendees, what the collaborative was about and the concerns in terms of the government's response, particularly to people who were confined in the prisons here in the state of North Carolina? Talk to us a little bit about that.
So mid-March, when everything kind of fell apart, as one might say, this group came together, lots of different criminal justice, social justice, civil rights organizations, advocates, about addressing the criminal justice system and what this pandemic means for the criminal justice system. And so, as you mentioned, incarceration was a priority. As I'm not sure if it was you, Tommy, but someone mentioned that being incarcerated just generally is a communal space. And so when we talk about what we know about this virus and that it's airborne and that the CDC is saying that social distancing is the cornerstone of keeping this virus from spreading any further, that 6 feet requirement, that's not even possible in our state prisons. I speak to folks on a regular basis. Just talked to someone yesterday, and still, inside of many of our prisons, you can lay in your bed and reach out your arm and touch the person beside you. There is no social distancing in a prison. And to add onto that, just on general principle, our prisons are overcrowded. I know it was mentioned today that DPS has been, letting folks out. That's a very minimal, that's a stretch. They have been letting people out, but it's not a significant number of people. And the fact that we're still taking people in, the numbers are just not going down in a way that we can effectively allow people in prison to practice that social distancing. When we started this advocacy, our prisons were over capacity for a regular circumstance. So in a pandemic, it is completely inhumane to force people, and I mean that force people, because people who are incarcerated have no control, have no autonomy over their own lives, and they have to rely on our Department of Public Safety to care for them and make sure that they are cared for. And that's not what was happening. So this COVID Justice Coalition, if you may, we started by just reaching out to many of the decision makers and state actors, highlighting that this is a problem and we need to address this. We reached out to the Department of Public Safety. We reached out to the governor. We reached out to the Conference of District Attorneys. We reached out to the Sheriff's Association. We reached out to so many different state actors that have so much power over what happens to people in this criminal justice system. We did this through letters with sign-ons from various members of this coalition, and overwhelmingly, there was no response or no real response. And so there were certain folks in this coalition that then got together and decided to file a lawsuit to force the state to take care of, protect the health and lives of people who are incarcerated. So we're still in the midst of that litigation.
So I hate to interrupt you when you say file a lawsuit. So the lawsuit, who were the main defendants in the lawsuit? And let our listeners know that you actually went into court and argued and just did a bang up job in arguing the position on behalf of those incarcerated in that litigation. So I'd be remiss because I knew you probably weren't going to mention that, but it should be known. Okay.
You know me well, James. You know me well. So we filed the lawsuit against the governor of North Carolina, the Department of Public Safety, Eric Hooks in his capacity as the director of that, and also the director of juvenile justice, so that we could address the issues in the juvenile detention facilities and detention centers. I did argue on a WebEx oral argument in a Wake County Superior Court room remotely. And I really argued about the irreparable harm that is present by the state refusing to act. And so some of the details that I shared about, how you can't practice social distancing in prisons, some of the details about the sanitation practices and the hygiene practices and whether or not people have masks and things that they're required to do that continue to put them in risk, establishes that irreparable harm that's required for the court to make a determination that they are acting with deliberate indifference. We challenge this under the North Carolina Constitution, stating that you have to have cruel or unusual punishment under the North Carolina Constitution. And we argued, and the court found that this is in violation of the North Carolina Constitution and cruel punishment to allow people force people to stay in this environment where they are unprotected. Right now, we're in the midst of trying to figure out what this order means in the sense of there have been specific directives to create plans. And so the Department of Public Safety, we're working with their attorneys to implement plans so that there are more people that are released, particularly folks who have met their minimum sentences, so that you can look at other factors like their age, their underlying health conditions, and folks who really, if you've met your minimum sentence, let you go. Just, why would we keep you in a cage? Additionally, testing. There have been minimal tests in North Carolina prison facilities. As you know, Noose Correctional was one of the largest prison outbreaks in the country when we found that there were over half of the people incarcerated in Noose Correctional in Goldsboro, North Carolina, tested positive for the virus. And what's unacceptable is that this can happen and there's still no urgency to respond. I mean, I spoke to someone in Noose who had been tested for the virus. We found out in the news that over 400 people tested positive. And when I talked to him, he still didn't know his results. So the prison knew, but he was not aware he tested positive.
Recently, very recently, I think within the past several days, I remember reading something where the prison system has announced that they're going to test all inmates, I believe. Do you think that would have happened without this litigation?
Well, I will say, James, that it was a part of the judge's order from last week that all people incarcerated in North Carolina prisons get tested. Okay. So I'll leave that to your interpretation.
Okay. Well, another piece of the effort too has been to try to get district attorneys within various districts to agree to what we kind of refer to as consent MARs, because they have some authority related to taking action that could expedite the release of particularly a certain category of people who are vulnerable. And I know there was some success with that, but certainly not to the extent that we had hoped, I believe.
That's right. And I would definitely like to highlight the Durham District Attorney, Susana DeBerry. She's been a champion in moving these MARs, motions for appropriate relief, forward in order to get people out on an individual basis. And I think it's sad that we have to do this on an individual basis, but we have to do we have to do both. We can continue in the litigation to try to get mass release from the state, but at the end of the day, we can't sit and wait for these things to happen. We have to, work on this at the same time. So we've been in contact with multiple district attorneys across the state. And I do want to mention that, I definitely give kudos to the DAs who are stepping up and doing something in this pandemic, but it also has to be signed by a judge. So there have been certain situations where we've gotten a district attorney to agree to these consent motions for appropriate relief and get before a judge, and they're either not willing to hear it or would not be willing or are ready to deny it. And so we as community members have to really express to our elected officials that this is important and that people's lives are important, and that people who are locked in cages by our criminal injustice system, as I like to call it, are just as important and just as valuable as the lives out here. We get an update from Governor Cooper every week about the social distancing guidelines, about the reopening that they're trying to do with the state, about how we need to wear masks. I remember at some point they said maybe there was 10 or 20% capacity in retail places. What about 10 or 20% capacity in prisons? Those are North Carolinians too. And so anything that applies to North Carolinians should also apply to people who are incarcerated.
So thank you. And I want to kind of segue into, and I think it's good, you mentioned people out here, because too often, I think when we think about mass incarceration, we think only about people who are incarcerated, right? And we know that the footprint of this criminal justice apparatus is much more huge than that. And the impact, the devastating impact that it has on so many lives, disproportionately Black and Brown lives, is something that needs to be front and center in these discussions also. And so, another area that I know you are very intimately involved is the cost and fees collaborative. I think that's what we used to call ourselves. There's a new name now because it's evolved over time, and you're more or less at the helm. So kind of talk to us about that and why that's so important.
Absolutely. So talked a little bit about incarceration, but a lot of people are focusing on the immediate health and public safety impacts of this pandemic. But we also have to really consider this economic winter, this recession that we are entering because of the pandemic. And so understanding that the state is going to be scrambling for various funds. You understand that, millions of people have filed for unemployment, but we also have to remember that that's not going to stop the courts from imposing these crazy fines and fees on people. So even before the pandemic, our coalition, our mission, and it is our campaign to end criminal justice debt in North Carolina. In the past 10 years, we've gone from 4 to I think 45 fees just overall in the criminal justice system, or criminal court system. Again, I don't like to call it the justice system, but and also just an increase in the amount of those fees. So 10 years ago, I think it was a baseline of $61 that you would pay at minimum. Now that baseline is $173, and that is rare that that's all that you will see. And so given just kind of the economic impact of this, the people who are going to be most directly impacted by this pandemic are generally the people who are most directly impacted by the criminal court system and by the fines and fees already. The existing debt that it's currently exists in our court system, it's not likely that it's going to get paid back. And so there's been a lot of work with some of our Second Chance Alliance partners, particularly with the North Carolina Justice Center, to have, amnesty days and partnering with local district attorneys to remit debt, because there's data that shows that after a certain period of time, I want to say 1 to 2 years, it's just unlikely that people will pay that back. And so many times this results in, revoking of someone's driver's license. So then you're kind of put in a situation where it's like, I don't have a valid driver's license, but you want me to pay these fees. I have to drive to work in order to get money so that I can pay the fees back. Do I just never pay them and stay at home? Or do I risk getting pulled over and getting another ticket and more fees so that I can go to work and pay for what you're asking me to pay for? And so we're putting people in a situation that's impossible to get out of. And so particularly as folks are, filing for unemployment left and right, we have to think about how we can address these fees. And so our coalition, the Fines and Fees Coalition, has worked on drafting an ability to pay rule to be implemented in courts across the state so that judges are not imposing fees before understanding a person's financial situation. And then, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
So kind of where are we in that process? Is it likely that before the end of the year, we might see such a rule adopted by some major court entity?
I am hopeful that that is the case. And I have, reasons to believe that that's the case. We've drafted the rule. We've drafted a form to go along with the rule so that people can share their financial situation. We've drafted a proposal with a rationale for the rule and shared that with our decision makers, our Chief Justice in North Carolina. And I think we have to remember that that's not the end. Having the rule is not the end of the fight. Because there are plenty of rules now that I've been in courtrooms across the state that I see are not followed. Courtrooms, I've been to, I think 62 was the last count when I was filing expungements across the state, different counties for court, and no two are the same. They all have their own local rules and things that they do and things that they follow. And so even when this rule gets implemented, we have to remember that accountability is very important. And I think Tommy touched on this a little bit, but we did a training back in February with our coalition, a court watching training, so that community members would know what to go into courtrooms and look for when it came to fines and fees and to document. We have court watchers in Durham, and judges know when those folks are in the courtroom, they should act right because people are watching and people are documenting what they're doing. Unfortunately, this pandemic kind of puts a hold on court watching for safety reasons, but we always have to think about ways to hold people accountable. Which is kind of what brings me back to one of the other questions that you asked about, what do folks want to see happen in this moment? Because we can't hold people accountable if we don't have any clear demands. For example, with some of the marches, I've been trying to be safe and social distance, but did want to be a part of it. But my main question is, what are the demands of this march? Like, what are we marching for? What are we asking for? So that, when we get to the opportunity where we have that discussion or when something happens, we can hold people accountable for what they're saying that they're going to do or what we're asking of them. And, as people, we have that power to vote these folks in and out. And so they have to respond to us, and we have to live up to that and make sure that we are maintaining our foot on the gas.
So that's a good point. And quite often, at these types of events, whether they're webinars or some other event, a question that you often get is, what can I do? And one of the things that you just mentioned were both the court watching part or in some other way, becoming informed about what your criminal justice stakeholders are doing, what they stand for, and if it's inconsistent with the values of justice and fairness, become more involved in an effort to get them to do better. If they don't, vote them out. This is a democracy, right? So one area that is getting a lot of attention today, is as a result of these police killings, is police reform, transformation, abolition. We hear quite often the term defund the police. I'm sure you've heard that too. Can you speak some to that, to the policing issue and where things stand there from your perspective?
Absolutely. And since you asked my perspective, I definitely do not like to group reform and reimagining or transformation in the same category because they're very different. What we've been doing for as long as I can remember is reform, and we are still getting the same results. We keep trying to tweak the system that currently exists, but the system that currently exists originates from slave catchers. The system that currently exists, we've seen the violence against people that look like us on this panel since the beginning of time because of the system of police. The system of police is maintained to protect the power structure, to maintain the status quo. And the status quo isn't good for Black people. The status quo is not okay for people that look like you and I. And so we have to stop talking about reforming a system that's rotten and at its core, and we have to talk about reimagining. And that's why making those clear demands and knowing exactly what we want is so important. People talk about defunding the police, which is really a step one to abolition of this racist system as it exists. And it's more than just, getting people out of cages, but again, we've been reforming so long, we have to try something new. The current society that we're living in, the prison industrial complex, it feeds on the maintenance of oppression and inequalities through punishment, through violence, through control of millions of people. Police, they want you to think that they control crime, but really they're responsive to calls. And we have other people that we can call and be responsive to a lot of the things that we're seeing police step in for. Particularly, like if you think about the essence of their power, it's their discretion to use violence. They're not accountable to the law, but they justify their actions with the law. And so instead, we need to start investing in community-led actions, community-led commissions, thinking about first responders that are trained in mental health, thinking about trauma-informed crisis intervention specialists, thinking about even city employees. I mean, how many of our people have gotten killed or harmed because they had a tail light out? A police officer with a badge and a gun should not be doing that. I mean, and we talk about the people that we see on camera, but there's so many that we don't see. So I'll stop there. I don't want to take up too much time. Let some of the other panelists jump in.
Well, before I let you go, though, I do want to have you speak to something that is happening today that is a little bit of a silver lining, a bill that is to be signed. And so can you speak about, I think it's the Second Chance Act?
That's right. So the Second Chance Act, Bill 562, is being signed by Governor Cooper today at 2:00. I'm very excited about this. As I mentioned earlier, defund is step one to abolition. Second Chance Act is first step as well. I don't ever want people to think that this is enough. But the Second Chance Act is something that the North Carolina Second Chance Alliance, Forward Justice, one of the anchor organizations in that alliance, has been pushing for over a year now. And when it comes to reentry and second chance legislation, we've been pushing it since I got involved in this. So I guess at least 5-6 years at this point that I've been involved in, far beyond that for everyone else. But the Second Chance Act will expand expungement opportunities for people who have criminal records. And so if you're just thinking back 5 years ago, 6 years ago, man, when I was in law school working on, expungements, there was no option for people to get their record expunged if it had not been 15 years since the time they were convicted, and that was the only conviction on their record. That was it. There were no exceptions. Otherwise, go on home. And so since then, the Second Chance Alliance has been advocating for expansion of these expungement laws, because as we talk about reentry and we talk about the collateral consequences people face without being able to get jobs and housing and volunteer in their children's schools, and the list just goes on, expungement is one tool that can address some of those issues. And so the Second Chance Act not only expands the eligibility for people who are able to get the clearing of a record. I'm sorry, I didn't explain expungement, but to clear charges or convictions off of your record. This now allows for multiple misdemeanors to be able to be cleared from your record. And it's a major step. Again, before it was a one-stop deal. If you had one conviction, you could wait 15 years and you'd be great. But now to have this multiple misdemeanors, that's going to bring a lot more people into the fold. It also has an automation portion, which what I learned in my expungement work over the years is that there are a lot, and I mean hundreds of thousands of people that are eligible for some form of expungement, whether it's a dismissed charge or a conviction, but they just don't have access. I mean, we would host clean slate clinics across the state in very rural places. And we had folks lining up at 6 o'clock in the morning, 500 people, because it was a free option to try to help them move past their criminal record. And unfortunately, we weren't able to go to all 100 counties, but when you look at the data of the numbers of people who were eligible, if they just had the access, there would be so many more people that would not be held back because of their record. And so the automation portion of this bill is one of the pieces that I'm most excited about, because I feel like it opens the door for further automation. So with the bill that's getting signed today, if you are charged and the charges are dismissed, it will automatically come off of your record, and that will start in December of 2021. We've been working with some of the tech and coding people to make sure that automation can be possible. But by saying that is possible, it opens the door for other expungements to have that automation component too. And so we're going to keep fighting for that.
So one other piece that I want you to speak to relates to young people, juveniles.
Right.
What's in this act for young people?
That's right. So I'm sure that folks have heard about Raise the Age. So up until very recently, North Carolina treated all 16 and 17-year-olds like adults in the criminal justice system. Raise the Age was a piece of legislation that changed that, such that 16 and 17-year-olds are treated in the juvenile system. There are ways to move their cases to the adult system, but it is no longer, you are automatically an adult at 16. And what you saw with that was people who were convicted when they were in high school for getting in a fight. I would talk to them, however many years later, and this is still on their record because they were children. And so I'm very excited about Raise the Age and what it means. But within the Second Chance Act, there is a provision for people who were kind of caught in the middle of Raise the Age. So there are lots of people in this state who, when they were 16 or 17, were charged as an adult. And now kids who are 16 or 17 are charged as children. So those folks that are in the middle that didn't benefit from Raise the Age, but also aren't eligible for an expungement because the expungement laws are so narrow, there's a provision in that Second Chance Act that allows people who were 16 or 17 at the time of an offense to petition the court to get their charges expunged from their record, so long as it's a class H or I felony or any misdemeanor. And those are the classes of offenses that are covered by Raise the Age. And one very important part of this is that district attorneys have the power and the authority to petition for this relief as well. So we talk about accessibility, district attorneys can do this on their own, and there can be mass relief. A district attorney can get a list of all of the people that fall into this category and do this on their own without having these folks have to come to the court and do that. And so our local community should be pushing and advocating for their local DAs to do this mass relief so that we can clean the records of those who were convicted as children.
Certainly, that's what a progressive DA would do, you would think.
One would think. So I guess
Okay.
we'll see. We will see who our progressive DAs are.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you so much, Whitney. I want to move back to Tommy and Will. Tommy, I want to get your thoughts, or either Will, either one. What is it that, in terms of resources, in order to do the work that you are doing, and you haven't really spoken about the wounded healers, but what resources, what additional help, if there are community members who want to try to help in terms of getting that work done, what can they do?
You want me to try to address that? I'm glad you brought up wounded healers. When an individual enters a new environment, a new workplace, a new community, jail or prisons, instinctively, we look for something familiar. And when you find a familiar face, you go to that person and you ask for direction on how to navigate yourself in that environment. To be point specific with wounded healers, when guys that have been just as involved enter prison or jails, the first thing, like I say, the first thing we do is we look around for a familiar face in this sea of people, because that person there's a sense of agency with that person to ask them for the right direction when it comes to the essential things that you need while you're in that environment. And it's the same thing when one individual is getting released from prison. When someone's getting released and they know they can go to someone who has been there and done that, so to speak, who has also been just as involved, when they can say, hey man, I just got out. I need a guide. I need a GPS system and how to find housing, how to find a job, because what I've been seeing on the media and what I've been hearing lately, there is no space again for me to enter into when I get released. Is that so? Is that true? And the beauty of a wounded healer is to be there to advocate for, to be a guide, and to be with that person along their way of putting their lives back together. And once again, I'm critically talking about the individuals who want to put their lives back together.
Right.
You're looking at two amongst so many. Most people getting out of prison really do want to put their lives back together.
Right, right.
And the ones that do and end up not doing that is because they didn't feel like they had a space or a voice or someone who really cared to guide them. So they lean on their own understanding.
Right.
They make
Right.
radical decisions. Oh yeah, I'm glad to be released, but I'm being released into an environment. I don't have a place to stay. I'm sure I can't get a job. I don't even have ID. That's the ultimate vulnerability, to be navigating around after prison and you don't have those basic things. When you don't have a wounded healer or someone you trust that truly understands what you've been through, you're gonna make a lot of drastic decisions under duress, under anxiety, under pressure, under fear. So wounded healers are here to say, hey man, I know what you've been through. Well, how so? Because I've been there and done that. You want to see my resume? You want to know all the prisons I've been to? You want to know how long I was in prison? Now, once we had that dialogue, we can say, you know what? Here's a great source for work. Here's a place that you can go to get some shelter and a place to live. And these are some people that are truly here to help you. That's the nature of what wounded healers do for one another. Because I want to stress this also, one of the greatest contributions to minimizing the recidivism rate is relationships that people like myself develop, maybe while in prison, but surely while outside of prison. And it takes a sense of self-confidence to know that I could even build a relationship as a free person. And when I meet somebody on a real level that cares enough about me, my confidence starts to elevate. And when my confidence elevates, I can get my voice back. Because prison is much like that police officer having his knee on someone's neck saying, I can't breathe. Prison sucks the breath out you. And it lasts a lot longer than 8 minutes and 40 some seconds. However, if you do endure it and survive it and get released, you are begging for someone to help you learn how to speak again. I just saw on the news someone was in a coma as a result of COVID. And when they got off the breathing machine, they had to go to therapy to learn how to speak again, how to use their voice. Prison needs wounded healers and advocates to help learn how to use your voice again for yourself. That's what wounded healers do, and that's the role that we play.
I want to, and I don't know if this is something you're willing to share or not, and if you're not, that's fine. I understand that you have a book that might be published sometime relatively soon. Can you speak about that, or what you hope the book, who it speaks to, and how you think it might help?
On the one hand, the book speaks to all that will listen. Specifically, the book is the good, the bad, the ugly of my experiences in my life, which also includes 24 and a half years of incarceration. And in the beauty of building relationships, I met a friend of mine by the name of Susan Simone, who took such interest in my story, she decided that it was worth giving away. And when she used that language, I got really excited, because I'm at a place in my life where day by day, I want to go to bed empty at night. I really want to give myself away because I don't want to take anything with me when I leave this earth. So a part of that is packaged in a manuscript that her and I put together to be a guide and a sense of confidence and a sense of direction for people on either side of incarceration, whether they have experienced it themselves or whether they're just curious to know that what that was like for me.
Right.
And the book is an orchestra of many voices, like a mass choir. And they're my experiences that I'm sharing that I've had with a multitude of people. And I'm glad you mentioned it on the one hand, but I'm always stumped when people ask me about the book, because it's already how I live my life so candidly and transparently, that happens to be put in a package called a book. And if you meet me, you've read the book.
So, there's a lot loaded in what you said, and I'm not going to try to unpack all of it, but I do want to mention a couple of things. Number one, I look forward to reading the book. Number two, I know Susan and her husband, and just beautiful people. And there are people who go about doing good work, not seeking accolades, just doing it, connecting with people. And I know that she's done, courses within the Orange Correctional and things like that. And I think about something that Brian Stevenson speaks to when he talks about how people can improve this system of oppression, this criminal justice apparatus that we have in this country, especially the racial injustices. And one of the things he says is you've got to get proximate to the problem. And in this case, if you're talking about incarceration and prisons, you've got to be willing to make connections with, those who are within that system. And when I think about that, and I think about the work that Susan and some others are doing, that's really what he's talking about, being willing to get proximate to the problem. So thank you. And Tommy, is there anything that you want to kind of add to this? Because part of this also, and something that Whitley mentioned and I spoke about, and that is, it is important that we talk about prison and incarceration and the challenges, and we'll, talking about what challenges people have when they step outside that door from prison. Okay, you're no longer in prison and you are expected to go out and do well. What are your worst fears when you step outside that door? That's one question I want to raise with you, Tommy. But another one is not even related to prison. It's related to how Black people, Black men in particular, but not just Black men, these police encounters over trivial stuff, quite often it could be an expired tag, it could be a broken tail light, but it's racial profiling, and then the way you're treated and the impact of this racialized system that we're forced to navigate, and the weight of that over years and how that impacts, your not just your physical, but your mental well-being, I think is something that's very underappreciated by a lot of people. So I don't know if you want to bite off a piece of that or not. Yeah.
It's you're a tough act to follow when you set the question up like that. But so just to start with the fear aspect that you asked about, what are your fears when you come out of prison? So I tell people, with the work that me and Will do, we tell our story a lot, and when I'm in telling my story, I always say that, my prison experience, my transition after prison is a little bit different from a lot of people that's inside right now. In the sense of, I come from a very strong family background. My family supported me the whole time I was there. Will's story is similar. So not only did I have the support that I needed to make it through all that time, but I had welcoming arms when I came home. and further support after I came home to help me back into my transition. So I had a lot of help, a lot of support, long story short. But the thing about that is, even with all the help, all the support I had, my family is not a rich family, nothing like that, but they're not poor. So even with adequate financial support, I still had to deal with what we call the collateral consequences of incarceration. And those are things like, I came home, I was still a felon, you know, while you're on probation. This will actually answer a question I saw in the chat box. Someone asked about voting for convicted felons and people come off incarceration or whatever. And when you're on probation, you can't vote. You can vote once you're off probation. Your voting rights are restored as well, which is crazy to me because once you're released from prison, supposedly all your rights are supposed to be restored anyway. So I don't understand why you can't vote while on probation, but that's one of the loopholes into that. But anyway, so you come home, you don't have a voice and nothing, and you don't have a voice in none of the political, no political aspect at all, which is also the people that run the country or the country that you're governed by. You don't have no say so on that. That's one thing. Then if you have a certain drug charge, you can't qualify for some social service benefits like food stamps. You can't live in Section 8 housing. So that could be a potential major hurdle if you're the type of person that comes home and only has family that lives in Section 8 housing, and you have that certain type of drug charge. So that could be a crutch as well. Then you deal with other things like certain people won't rent to you. That was one of the things that hurt me the most when I tried to get a place of my own. I couldn't find nobody to rent to. Since I've been home for 5 years now, I still haven't had a place in my name. The first place I got, I moved in with my fiance at the time, married now, of course. But the second place, being my fiance got, we rent from my mom now. My mom is our landlord, just because everywhere we filed, anytime you had to add my name to the lease, we was turned down. Right. Other things, nobody typically, again, like I said, I was a person that came home with a lot of support and everything, but I didn't technically come home with a car, my own car. My dad let me use his, so transportation is definitely a major factor. You see what I was saying about the FIT program, the Former Incarcerated Transition Program. Healthcare is a major factor. That's one thing that I didn't even realize was the issue until I got into this profession. I came home with no chronic conditions, no physical health issues. I want to say no mental health issues. My wife might not agree. I don't know. But, I think I came home fairly well. So, that aspect of it, I knew nothing about until, again, I met, the people that I work for, Orange County. He sat down with Dr. Ashkin. He gave me the whole spiel about this supreme disconnect that formerly incarcerated people experience with dealing with healthcare. So to wrap all it up, I mean, it's a lot of fear just surrounding being a person coming home with a convicted felon coming home, period. Then you add on the fact that I'm a Black man that came home. Now I got all these stigmas attached to me. And now I also have the stigma of being Black in America, which is probably the biggest hindrance out of all of them I named. So all in all, it's a terrifying feeling coming home, even with support. That's one of the reasons me and Will do what we do, because we understand the struggle from an aspect of having help. So we can only imagine what the struggle is without the help that we provide. So essentially, wounded healers and us, we consider ourselves as that family piece that a person might not have that we did have when we came home.
Okay. Well, I know we're getting close to the bewitching hour of 2 p.m. and I want to, first of all, thank our panelists for just an excellent job. I want to thank Damon and the town of Carrboro, the town of Chapel Hill, the local Reentry Council, and Kate Finhagen, the director of the Community Resource Department, which has done such an excellent job in sort of addressing a lot of the issues that we've been talking about today, including helping to establish the local Reentry Council. So, and I know there are some questions that we didn't get to. I'm sure there's some process that we can follow up with that and send some responses. So, Damon, are you still there? You want to close us out, or what do we do?
I am still here, James. Thank you. I want to just echo James's thanks to all the panelists. This was really excellent to hear from all of you and to share your perspectives, both your personal experiences and your professional work that you're doing now to advance this work toward, and I think Whitley said it very well, not just reforming the system anymore. We're done reforming. We've done that, right? We need to think new,
Right.
think about new ways to approach this. And so I appreciate you hammering on that point. All of the panelists really hit that point very well today. I also just want to thank all the people who attended the webinar today. We had an overcapacity crowd, including viewers on our YouTube live stream. And so we will be making the link available after the event is over. And once the recording is ready to share, we'll share that on social media as well. So look out for that.
All right. Thank you.
All right. Have a great afternoon.
Good day.
Thank you. Y'all have a good one.
Thank you.